Hi guys, Tynan Murray here. Wanted to get on, do the Zoom presentation, which I've never done before, so I hope I'm doing this right so I can send the link. But this is for the initiatives and referendums in Arizona. So let's jump right into it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. There we go. Alrighty. So again, like I said, this is the presentation on the initiatives and referendums in Arizona. Um, so let's jump right into it here. I do have our first slide is going to be just kind of what this presentation involves. So today I'm going to talk about the initiative and referendum process in Arizona. Um, these tools are super key parts of democracy. They allow voters, not just politicians, to decide on laws and policies. So like this when we do the tools and the keys are direct part of direct democracy. When politicians are put in place there to be the voice of the constituents, so letting the voters and not just the politicians decide the laws is very key. So what do they mean? Um, let's look into initiative and referendum definitions. So initiatives, citizens propose new laws and amendments by gathering signatures. This is done in a number of ways. It works by collecting signatures, and if enough are valid signatures, the proposal goes onto the ballot. From there, as the Secretary of State explains, it's the process by which voters may propose new laws or amend existing laws by gathering signatures from registered voters. So that's key to place the issue on the ballot. And that is from the Arizona Secretary of State. So that people can bypass the legislature if needed. So, jumping into referendums, a referendum, on the other hand, is how voters can approve or reject laws already passed by the legislature. So that's key because it allows citizens to gather signatures to have a recently passed law placed on a ballot. As described, a referendum lets voters veto a law. So or part of the law by gathering enough signatures again of registered voters to place on the ballot. We've heard of vetoes by the executive branch or vetoing the president. So now within the state, the citizens can vote to veto a law that may have just been passed or is part of a law. And again, getting to have their voice heard, the citizens get to make these decisions instead of just the politicians voting. So the creative process or the creation process for initiatives. So the initiative process, number one, form or designate a political committee and file an application for a serial number. From there, the draft the measure, circulate the petitions, and collect signatures. Now, 10% of votes cast in the last gubernatorial election for a statutory initiative, 15% for a constitutional amendment. So it takes for the amendment of the Constitution 15% of votes and 10% for a statutory initiative. Three, we're going to submit at least 4 months before the election. There has to be the process of review to make sure that it is valid before it goes to the ballot to be voted on. If valid, the measure goes on the next general election. So again, 4 months in advance, then it gets put on the ballot to be voted on by the constituents. So now into the referendum process. Oh no, what happened? There we go. I'm sorry about that. So the referendum process. So when the legislature passes a law, the public has 90 days after the adjournment to gather signatures. So once that law is passed, from that meeting, the vote that's passed, now there's 90 days to get to the point where they collect enough signatures from registered voters to get it put on or change the referendum or get the referendum to be voted upon. I'm sorry. Uh, they must collect around 5% of the votes cast in the last election. So if there's 100 votes, they have to get 5% of the 100 votes. That's 20 signatures. And then if successful, the law is delayed and put on the ballot. So it got passed. They want the referendum. 5% of the voters have to have the signatures on it, and then it'll go back to the ballot for approval or rejection. So the voters then decide whether to let the law take effect. Again, they're going to either veto it or approve it, and that is part of the referendum process. So let's kind of compare and contrast here. So for an initiative proposed by the citizens, they draft and collect the signatures. They have to have 10% of signatures for the statutory or 15% for the constitutional amendment, which is more than the referendum. And then the timing, they must be filed at least 4 months before the election. And then that is to the purpose is to propose a new law or amendment. The referendum. So the origin, it targets legislative actions that have already been passed by the legislature. They need 5% of voter signatures from the last election. So like I said, again, if it's 100 citizens that voted, they need 5%. That's 20 votes or 20 signatures, excuse me. Timing, it must be valid or it must be filed within 90 days of when the legislature is adjourned or from the last governor election. I'm sorry, from the last legislative adjournment. And then the purpose to approve or reject an existing law. Again, we do the referendums or citizens do referendums so they can veto a law that may have just been passed. Pros and cons for initiatives. So pros, obviously, it empowers the citizens to propose laws directly. It can also address issues ignored by the lawmakers. Again, it really gives the people the power to have their voice heard instead of just politicians that go and vote for their own well-being or their own agendas. It gives the citizens a true voice. Cons, so it can be expensive and time consuming. So it takes, thousands of signatures most of the time that need to be collected. That's why you see people out front of stores, Walmart, Albertsons, whatever, getting signatures. And it's a lot of effort. There's people that are doing it instead of their jobs to collect signatures or do it after they get off work, have families, but they're putting the initiative and getting it corrected or proposing that new law ahead of their own personal agendas or schedules. Like I said, there is a risk that the draft is poorly drafted without the legislature scrutiny. So there could be confusing wording or unintended effects. Another con, vulnerable to influence by well-funded interest groups. So those are lobbyists or interest groups that have deep pockets that can kind of kill an initiative sometimes if they can sway votes. Referendum pros. So as you see on the slide, pros, public check on legislature accountability. So it serves as a public check on a legislative veto by the people, not just politicians that are representing our constituents. Another pro of a referendum, it can keep lawmakers accountable to public opinion. That is huge for democracy. That is what these checks and balances are for. And again, it still gives a voice to the people. Some cons to referendums, hard to mobilize quickly. So 90 days we talked about, right? It's 90 days instead of 4 months. And now you say, well, it's 3 months instead of 4. That's still quick turnaround. If you think about 90 days can fly by, especially if you're trying to get a certain percentage of votes, 5% of the last election, depending on how many voters there were, that can be a very large number. And then another con of referendums, it can overly delay laws or be used to strategically block important measures. So maybe it's like in Congress. I can't remember the word. But to strategically block. So you can have others that put in a referendum, or politicians or voters that put in a referendum just to block something else. And maybe it does get voted against, but still now you have to go through that process of collecting everything for signatures, put it back on the ballot 90 days, and it can be just a roadblock. So those are some of the cons of referendums. Now, how these support direct democracy. So, how do these tools support direct democracy? Well, the Arizona Constitution states that the people reserve the power to propose laws and amendments and to enact or reject such laws and amendments at the polls, independently of legislature. Again, it gives a voice to the people. They have a direct impact on whether these are put into action or voted against. So both the initiatives and referendums give voters real practical control over lawmaking, not just through electing representatives, but they get to actually use their own voice. They reinforce the idea that sovereignty rests with the people, aligning with the Arizona's founding principles. So in Arizona's Constitution reflects the sentiment that direct democracy was sacred. So again, it keeps the direct democracy in the hands of the people, in the hands of the constituents, instead of just putting it on the representatives who may have a different agenda and not vote according to their constituents, which does happen. In conclusion, initiatives let voters propose new laws directly, while referendums give voters the power to approve or reject laws passed by the legislature. Each has unique benefits, like we talked about, pros and cons, and we compared the two. But both are essential to the direct democracy of the Arizona Constitution and Arizona itself. And with that, it ensures Arizona's Constitution and what it all enshrines and encompasses. So with that, thank you guys for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions. I know this isn't an open forum, but if there's any questions, you can always post a question below the link that I will send to this video. Awesome. And to go along with it, there are some reference side. Thank you all.